Hello, welcome back to the Three-Handed Bandits channel, the only channel where I say this. It's Nathan back with another preseason power ranking breakdown for you today, unveiling the 18th ranked Denver Broncos in our 2023-2024 preseason power rankings. This Denver Broncos team has probably had the most wild up and down last two seasons of any team maybe in NFL history. Obviously, heading into the last year, there was tons of hype and expectations with their new head coach, Nathaniel Hackett, and Russell Wilson. And one season later, they had 5 wins, have a brand new head coach, and nobody knows what's going to happen with the team this season. This team is probably the most confusing team that I think we've ever had to analyze as a football community. And it's going to be really interesting to see how everything kind of plays out once the season is set into motion. Before we begin talking about this team, please go ahead and like and subscribe and share this video with somebody that you care about. So obviously, as I said, this is a very confusing team who really shit the bed last year and is really hoping to kind of fix things heading into this year. And so briefly, we'll talk about their offseason, kind of what they brought in and what they lost. And a lot of the optimism for this team heading into this new year under Russell Wilson is they bring in Sean Payton, who obviously with his time in New Orleans was one of the top, 5 head coaches in the league. Took some time off, and now he's back here in Denver. So part of the reason that's going to be so confusing is what necessarily is going to bring, after a couple of years of not coaching. We'll kind of talk about him in just a little bit more. But they're losing Nathaniel Hackett. So no matter what Sean Payton is, it probably can't be much worse. I think Nathaniel Hackett is probably the second worst coaching hire. Actually, I'll say Nathaniel Hackett is the third worst coaching hire. Behind Urban Meyer and Freddie Kitchens is what I'm gonna say. He really held his team back last year with very poor offensive coaching and in-game decision making and just everything all around. It was horrible. And so you're hoping Sean Payton's gonna come in and really fix this coaching staff. And they also lose Vance Joseph and lose Ejiro Evero. Ejiro Evero, I think, was really, really great for this team and really had them performing really well. And so I do think Vance Joseph isn't necessarily going to hurt this defense, but I don't think he's going to have as quite a good unit as Ejiro Evero was running. Then on the offensive side, bring in Jarrett Stidham, who had a really good couple of weeks to end last year as a Raider. And so maybe he can come in here and play if Russell Wilson isn't cutting the mustard. And then they're getting Javonte Williams back. His knee was really fucked up, so I don't really know exactly when or, what percentage, healthy, Javonte Williams is going to be when he comes back. But him coming back is going to help this team. But in the meantime, they bring in Samaje Perine, who will kind of be the main guy for them until he's fully healthy and ready to go. And they lose Latavius Murray, who had an actually pretty decent year for this Broncos team last year. And at the wide receiver position, bring in Marquez Callaway. Sean Payton brings one of his guys over, as well as they drafted Marvin Mims in the second round. Marvin Mims, who's now probably going to have to take a big step up because this team has lost Tim Patrick to another season-ending injury. You got to feel really bad for Tim Patrick. As well as KJ Hamler just came out that he had a heart condition, and he's going to miss some time, so we don't know exactly when he's going to be out there on the field. Sean Payton also brings his boy Adam Troutman over. And then they bring in Mike McGlinchey over from the 49ers, as well as Ben Powers to kind of help fill out the last couple of pieces on this offensive line as they're losing Dalton Reisner and Graham Glasgow and Billy Turner as well. And then on defense, Vance Joseph brings his guy Zach Allen over. They bring in Frank Clark, as well as drafting Drew Sanders and Riley Moss with their third-round picks. On the defense, they lose Draymond Jones, who's really good interior piece for this team. They traded away Bradley Chubb at the end of last year for a first-round pick, and they're losing Ronald Darby, who's been a pretty decent corner for this team. So overall, I do think it's a positive offseason, mainly just because you're losing Nathaniel Hackett and you're bringing in Sean Payton, who really knows what he's doing and is hopefully going to help fix the culture and kind of reset this team. I do think losing Ejiro Evero is probably going to be this team's biggest loss. But let's go ahead and talk about this coaching. And obviously, it's going to start off with Sean Payton, who, as I said, when he was in New Orleans, the last 15 years he was there, he was an excellent coach. And, really he always had well-coached teams and was really able to get the best out of his position players as an offensive mind for whatever team he's been on. And so I do think that having Sean Payton, who's going to come in, kind of cut the crap, and really get this team playing good offense again, I think is massively going to improve this team and is obviously the biggest piece to their offseason on the offensive side. Uh, the thing, though, is he has had a couple years out. So I do think year one could be a big culture shock and could really disappoint. And there might be some hiccups as, he hasn't been, to a new team in 17 years now. Like, he's had some time away from the game. So I wonder how he's going to transition to kind of being a new face in Denver. But as I said, he cannot be worse than Nathaniel Hackett was last year. And then Joe Lombardi is really just an extension of Sean Payton. It is Sean Payton's offense. But Joe Lombardi is a guy that's been loyal and stuck around Sean Payton for most of his time in the league. And then Vance Joseph is going to run a real heavy 3-4 system. Also kind of what Ejiro Evero ran last year. But I don't think Vance Joseph is quite the coach that Ejiro Evero is. I do think Ejiro Evero really, really, really had that defense overperforming last year, which I do think is a good defense. But I think Ejiro Evero turned a good defense to a great defense. I don't necessarily know if I believe Vance Joseph is going to do the same, but I don't think he's going to be a liability on the coaching staff and really going to, have a poor defense. I think the defense is still going to be pretty solid, but not quite as locked down as it was for a good chunk of the year last year. Let's go ahead and talk about this offense real quick, and it all starts with Russell Wilson. Who even knows what he is? As you can see, my ranking in the bottom corner, I have him ranked from anywhere from the 10th to the 25th quarterback. Like, this is probably the biggest wild card of any team that I could think of in recent memory. Because Russell Wilson, 2 to 3 years ago in Seattle was like a top 5 quarterback. And then last year had a bit of a down year, going through some, I think he had a thumb injury. And then he comes to Denver and just doesn't look like the same human being. So obviously I do think he was limited by Nathaniel Hackett's offense, which had poor play calling. You had receivers running into each other. And just overall, I think that offense did a lot of stuff that he doesn't want to do in the Shanahan wide zone scheme. But he was not free from blame either. He was really timid. He wasn't, creating as much offense as he normally has in the extension. He was missing throws. He was making incorrect reads. He wasn't great in the short game. And so overall, it's weird. Like, how much of last year do you put on him? How much was Nathaniel Hackett? Like, it's really hard to tell. Because he still has great arm talent, and every now and then he still layers in these amazing throws. But then yet again, he just looked so timid last year. He just didn't look like the same Russell Wilson. And there's no play more apparent than that goal line stand that Indianapolis had to beat them in like week 5 when KJ Hamler, I think it was screaming open on that slant across the middle. And it's like almost like he had trauma from losing the Super Bowl. Like, he just didn't even look that way or throw that ball. And it's just so hard to know what we're going to get from Russell Wilson this year. Because last year, he wasn't the worst quarterback in the NFL, but he played like a bottom 10 quarterback for most of the season. So are we going to get that same Russell Wilson, or is being out of that offense, is he going to regain some confidence? Is he going to step up and be, a top 5 quarterback that he once was? Like, what version of Russell Wilson are we getting? It's such a weird, I can't even describe it. It's just, I've never had a player that's just such a giant range of outcomes of what's going to happen. How is he going to play this season? Like, it's just impossible to really tell. And so he's really going to determine if this is going to be a playoff team or it's going to be a team picking in the top 10 again. You know what I mean? It's just a lot of this team is going to rely on what Russell Wilson does. And who knows what that's going to be. I would love to give you some analysis, great analysis and insight, but I just can't, just because last year was such a weird blip. Like, it was just, elite play, and then just whatever the hell that was last year. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Is Denver going to be stuck with him on another 5 years, paying $200 million of horrible play? Or is he going to prove to play to that contract? We'll see. Worst case, they brought in Jarrett Stidham, who, is a highly recruited guy coming out of high school. Kind of was underwhelming at Auburn. got drafted, by the Patriots, didn't really do much there. But last year when they benched Derek Carr over in Oakland, he came in and played pretty excellently. So maybe if Russell Wilson isn't that guy, Jarrett Stidham could come in and at least be okay for them. I think very least Jarrett Stidham is going to be an okay backup. And then Ben DiNucci, popular for the memes, not a great quarterback. And so let's go ahead and talk about this receiving core. So last year when Russell Wilson got traded to the Broncos, I was lower on the Broncos. I think a lot of people had them as playoff teams. Some people even had them as a Super Bowl team. I thought they were going to miss the playoffs. Granted, I thought they were going to be like 8-9, not 5-12 and horrible. I thought it was going to be a good team. But part of the reason that I was slightly hesitant on the Denver Broncos was I felt like their receiving options were a bit limited. I don't feel like that the receiving options they had were quite as explosive as a lot of people kind of thought. And I think a lot of people thought that they were a quarterback away. But I had some hiccups or some hesitations kind of about this receiving core. And I still do. So at the time I made this, we just found out that Tim Patrick was injured. I didn't really know what it was. So ignore my spreadsheet. It's a little inaccurate because Tim Patrick still kind of has, a question mark next to him. Tim Patrick's out for the year now. So you really just got Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and whatever else you can get from the rest of these bodies here. So I do think Jerry Jeudy might end up being a more productive player. Jerry Jeudy coming out was, hyped up for his route running, and I think he's been every bit as good as advertised with his route running. I do think he's one of the better route runners in the league. I just feel like, rack and contested catchability is going to limit him from being a true elite wide receiver. And Russell Wilson in this offense really didn't do him any favors last year. So while I do think he'll be productive and be a decent wide receiver for this team, I do think that he's just a good wide receiver. Compared to someone like, Tampa, for example, who has Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I think Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy aren't as good players. Like neither of them are as good as players as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is. I do think this is, a group of good wide receivers. Like they're two good wide receivers, but I don't think any of them are true number one receivers. Like I do think of Tampa, for example. And so you also have Courtland Sutton, who's more of a perimeter, true X wide receiver. Can get open okay. Has okay contested catchability. Like he's a good wide receiver, got good hands, secure player. But I don't think any of these are really, either of these guys are star players. I don't think either of them are elite. I'm really not sure if I see either of them kind of developing into that. I do think they're both two really solid wide receivers, and I think you'd rather have them than not. But to me, I think they're both number two guys. So I really think this team is limited by the fact that they don't have a true number one. As I said, I think both these guys are good players, not great players. And then Tim Patrick, obviously, is not going to be here. So who's going to step up as wide receiver 3? So obviously they bring in Marquez Callaway as well as Lil Jordan Humphrey, two guys that Sean Payton has ties to. So imagine starting off, we might see a lot of Marquez Callaway, and you're hoping that Marvin Mims kind of takes that role over. Marquez Callaway has kind of just been, a number 4, number 5 guy at best in his time in New Orleans, and has gotten on the field, but hasn't really been great when he has played due to some of the injuries that the Saints have had at that position in the last couple of years. And then Marvin Mims, obviously they draft him in the second round. I just don't know if he's going to be a great player. I really don't think he's going to be anything spectacular, but, relying on him to step up, I think is not going to really, you're not really expecting much from him. And obviously you're hoping that he can step up and be a good, third wide receiver for this team. I just don't necessarily see that happening. I think he's going to be an okay player. I just don't really know if I really believe he's going to be a good player for this team. And then Kendall Hinton in the slot, obviously everybody knows him from that COVID time when he was a quarterback. But, he's got decent athleticism. He's an okay route runner, and maybe they can use him as a little bit of a gadget player. And maybe he gets a chance to kind of get on the field more here, but, he's good depth. He's an okay slot wide receiver and a decent little option for this receiving unit. Then talking about also the tight end group, like they got Greg Dulcich, who I think is one of the better receiving tight ends in the league. I think he got on the field kind of late last year, but when he did, I think he looked the part as a really good wide receiving tight end. So fantasy football, he's a guy I'm targeting kind of in late rounds to maybe throw a dart at, but I do think he's going to, keep developing. and be a really good receiving option for this team, even though he's not a great blocker. And then Chris Manhertz, Adam Trautman, and Alberto, you're really not getting much from them in the receiving game. So overall, this is like just a not very good receiving unit. Like Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Greg Dulcich, I think are all good options, but none of them are elite or star players yet. Maybe Jerry Jeudy or Greg Dulcich can develop into star, or elite players. I just don't really necessarily know if I see that fully happening. Maybe with Greg Dulcich I do. But, there's not a whole lot of depth either. If Jerry Jeudy goes down, I think the short to intermediate game of this offense, the short game is really going to struggle. And then if Cortland Sutton goes down, they really just don't have any perimeter ball winners outside of him. So at the end of the day, I just don't really think that this receiving unit is going to really help this team win football games. And then you talk about the running back room, you got JAVONTE Williams coming back from injury. Who really knows what's going to happen with him? We've seen a couple of these younger guys get some injuries and really struggle to come back. For example, Cam Akers was one. There's another one somewhere in my head. I just can't, think of it the second. But who knows, how healthy and how explosive is he going to work? Is he going to look, heading into week 1 and throughout the beginning part of this season? And so for the meantime, they got Samaje Perine, who will be a pretty kind of, I think, a low-end starter for them. He can pass catch a little. He's a decent runner. But he'll be a low-end decent starter for this team until JAVONTE Williams does get back. But Tony Jones and Tyler Beatty are two young guys that have decent explosiveness. Tyler Beatty, coming out of Minnesota, was a pretty good receiving back. And so maybe he's a guy who could step up and be a third down running back kind of for this team. But, overall, same thing that I was saying with the wide receiver room. You got some good players, but no one you're really scared of. No one I think is really a star. And so you're putting a lot of pressure on Russell Wilson, who we don't necessarily know what's going to happen with him to really come in and win games. I think you're expecting him to elevate some of these players, not necessarily the other way around. So overall, I'm just worried about kind of the playmakers for this team, limiting them, not quite being as good as needed to win games in the NFL. So even though you feel a little bit, worse about the skill position, I do think you have a really excellent offensive line. It's going to be an offensive line that's a little bit better pass protecting than it is run blocking. But starting off with your tackle duo, you have one of the best tackle duos in the league, I think. Garrett Bowles is really solid. He's a good pass protector, good run blocker. You don't really have any issues with him. Mike McGlinchey has turned into one of the better run blocking right tackles in the league. I just do think that, he's still limited as a pass protector. Early in his career, he really struggled, and he's developed into a fine pass protector. But also, he's a super athletic guy, but he's really been in these Shanahan, wide zone schemes. And so it's going to be interesting to see kind of how he develops to more traditional run game, more traditional passing sets as well. So Mike McGlinchey could be a guy who really struggles this year as he kind of learning curve, fitting a new scheme. But overall, I do think he'll still end up at least being a good run blocker. But I will be just maybe a little bit worried about his pass blocking. But on the interior, you got 3 solid guys. Quinn Miners has developed to a really good guard, and I think he's someone who could develop even more. He's a rock in pass protection and is a real headhunter in the running game as well and can really push people off the ball. And I think he could slowly develop into one of the better guards in the league. And Ben Powers is also a really good pass protector as well. Not quite as good as a run blocker, but still a good pass protector for this team. And that means your center is your weakest link with Lloyd Cushenberry, who's developed into a decent center. He's good blocker, good pass blocker. And, he's okay in the running game. So, overall, you have a solid 5. You don't have any weakness there. And no one's going to be a true liability in the passing game, which is good. Maybe Mike McGlinchey might be. And you got, really good run blockers. Even if Lloyd Cushenberry is your weakest link, that's a really good offensive line. So I think this is an offensive line that could really be, a top 10 unit in the league. However, they don't really have a whole lot of depth. Cam Fleming has been a really good 6-man for this offensive line. But outside of him, you really got nothing. So this is a unit that does have to stay healthy, or that could really lead to some issues for this offense. But overall, kind of recapping when we talked about this offense, all of it's going to come down to Russell Wilson. I think the offensive line play is going to be good, but an injury or two in this unit could really, really be a liability for this team. And I do think that this receiving group and these running back, these skill positions for this team is really holding this team back as well. I just don't think they're really as good as needed to win a lot of games in the NFL. But, if Russell Wilson really returns to form and he's able to kind of get the best out of these guys, then they'll be good enough to at least, win them, a handful of games to compete for the playoffs. But if Russell Wilson is playing poorly and he's not getting help from these position players, then this offense could be one of the worst offenses in the league again. But, there's also the chance that it's a top 10 offense. That's what I'm saying. This is just such a confusing team. You got a brand new offensive play caller. Whatever are we going to get from Russell Wilson and skill positions that, is injury away from being a true liability, but are also talented players. You know what I mean? So it's a really interesting, weird offense to talk about. And the defense, I don't fully know what's going to happen with this unit either. So let's kind of start by talking off with this D-line, and we'll start off with edge group. And we'll start off with Randy Gregory, who has been a really good player when he's been out there, but more if he's out there. He's a guy that has missed most of every season that he's played. How many games are we even getting from him? He's excellent pass rusher when he's out there. He's a really good pass rusher. But you know what I mean? Like, how many games are we even going to get? Are we going to get 5 games of decent pass rush? Are we going to get 7 games? Are we going to get 10 games? He's shown he can't play 10 games. Are we expecting him to play 10 games? Are we expecting a full season from him? Unlikely. So, if he's your best guy, if he goes down, then you're expecting some okay players at best to kind of step up, in his wake. And then run defense, he's a decent run defender, but not as good as he has the tools to be, that's for sure. And so if we're not getting Randy Gregory, that means we're going to need probably Baron Browning to kind of break out. So he really didn't do much at the beginning of the year, and then they threw him at edge, and he absolutely exploded onto the scene in that game against Indianapolis. So he had 38 pressures on the season. 10 of them came in that game. That might have been the most dominant performance of any player, any position at all last year. He just exploded in that game against the Colts. But that means in the other 16 games he played, he had 28 pressures. So he's really raw. I think he was kind of a traditional linebacker coming out of the draft, and Micah Parsons-esque ever threw him on the edge. And, when he got out there for the first time, he truly exploded. But he's not, the best pass rusher. He's still raw, still kind of learning the position. But obviously, as he showed, he's got great bend, great speed, and hopefully he can develop into becoming a really solid, more consistent pass rusher. Is able to get after the quarterback a little bit more consistently. Then outside of him, you got Frank Clark, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito as some other edge guys. So I'll talk about Nick Bonito, who's more similar to Baron Browning. They're literally both listed at 6'3", 240. But I just don't think he's going to be as good of a player. He's just an absolute ball of fury. And, there's a place for that in the NFL. But he's even more raw than Baron Browning is, and he really needs to develop quickly if he's going to be a good player for this team. And, both these guys are listed at 6'3", 240. Neither of them are great edge defenders. They're just a little bit, undersized to really defend the run on the edge. Then Frank Clark has been the most okay edge player in the NFL for the last couple of years. Is he a weakness? Not necessarily. Is he a strength? Not necessarily. Are you happy you have him? Not necessarily. He's just a very okay player who's been severely overpaid the last couple of years. But at least he's someone that can come in and give them rotational snaps. Then Jonathan Cooper is probably their best edge defending or run defending edge player. He's decent defending the run and not a liability in the passing game either if he's out there. So overall, this edge group I don't think is going to be able to get after the quarterback as much as this team is going to need. And, without Randy Gregory, it's going to be a very interesting unit to kind of see what they do. But Baron Browning is a guy that I'm excited for. I just don't really know how much he's going to necessarily produce. He still needs to learn and develop how to be a more traditional edge rusher. And then on the interior, they have one of the deepest groups in the NFL, if not the deepest. It starts with DJ Jones, who's a really excellent nose tackle for this team, a really good run defender, but not as great getting after the quarterback. I think their best interior presence for getting after the quarterback is going to be Zach Allen, who coming out kind of took some time to develop the play strength and develop into a decent player. But clearly, Vance Joseph really liked him. He had a really good, last couple of years in Arizona. I think being with J.J. Watt really, really helped him. And so he's developed into a pretty decent player. I really just don't know if he's going to, have the tools to be a true explosive impact on the interior. But he's definitely a good player, and you're glad you have him. He can defend the run. He can get after the quarterback at a decent rate. Overall, just a decent player. And then a lot of the other guys you have here are really just good run defenders. You're not really expecting much from them getting after the quarterback. So overall, I do think that this defensive line might struggle with getting after the quarterback. But at least, especially with the interior, they're going to do a pretty good job of defending the run. But yeah, I think that this pass rush is going to hold this defense back. And then quickly talking about the linebacking group, you got two decent options here. Josie Jewell is a much more balanced linebacker. He can drop into coverage. He can defend the run at a pretty decent clip. He's a pretty good player. He's well balanced. And Alex Singleton is a little bit more of a run defense specialist, who's a little bit more of a liability and pass coverage. While Josie Jewell is very balanced, Alex Singleton, you really want him defending the run. You really don't want him playing coverage in space. And then Jonas Griffith was okay for them last year. And then Drew Sanders drafted him in the third round. Hopefully he can kind of develop into this team's number one linebacker. He's a guy who's got some tools. He's got decent athleticism and could be a pretty decent player for this team, in a couple years' times. Not really much to say about this unit. I'd really, they don't have a bad linebacking unit, but neither of these guys are dynamic playmakers that's going to win a whole lot of games for this team, And then the secondary, though, is probably where you have the most hype for this team, especially this defense. It's going to start off with Pat Surtain, who, ESPN had their thing where they had, front office people in the NFL rank, top 10 player in each position. And Pat Surtain ranked as one of the top 3 corners. And that's for a reason, because he's one of the top 3 corners in the league. He's a true elite player, locked down to man coverage, and really helps everyone else in the secondary play better than their play grade just because he is such a lockdown corner. You can throw him in man coverage on the backside, and you're not going to have to worry about that. It's really, it helps a lot of these other players simplify what they have to do. And then Justin Simmons is one of the best safeties in the league. I don't know if he's necessarily Minkah Fitzpatrick or Jesse Bates, but he's still a really good safety. Doesn't necessarily have the speed to be an elite safety, but he's definitely not a liability. Definitely a really good player. Between him and Pat Surtain, you got 2 of the top 10 players in their position, like 2 really good people in that secondary. The other safety spot is a little bit interesting between Kareem Jackson and Caden Stearns. It's gonna be interesting to see old-ass Kareem Jackson if Caden Stearns, who's a guy that had a lot of hype, being either second or third round pick. But Caden Stearns is a young guy you're hoping is going to be able to take the reins and overtake Kareem Jackson and be the starting safety for this team, starting box safety for this team. And then the other 2 cornerback spots, you got K'Wan Williams, who is one of the better slot corners in the NFL. He can play decent coverage, and he's not afraid to come up and hit somebody either. And the other corner spot, you got Damari Mathis or Riley Moss. I mean, it'll probably be Damari Mathis. He's a very kind of low-end version of Pat Surtain. He's a really good, covered corner. Still a little bit raw, still learning his position, but overall, you're hoping that he can keep taking strides to be a better player. And the draft Riley Moss in the 3rd round probably won't get on the field much unless there's an injury. But he's got some decent athletic tools, so maybe he can kind of develop into a good corner for this team. But overall, I'm just a little bit lower on this defense. Obviously, they were so good last year, but I think a lot of that was from Ejiro Evero being a great coach. And while I don't think Vance Joseph is going to be a bad defensive mind, I don't think he's going to be as good as Ejiro Evero was for this team. So I do think this team is going to struggle just a little bit, and I really think they're going to struggle getting after the quarterback more than, I think it's going to be one of the worst pass rushers in the NFL, unless Baron Browning can really step up to be, this team's, Micah Parsons. Granted, he won't be playing linebacker, but Micah Parsons-esque player, the way, came from inside backer. But, this is not going to be a defense that is really going to cost his team games. But I don't think they're going to win as much games as, frankly, they should have last year. Let's go ahead and talk about their schedule. So Vegas has their over-under at 8.5. My projection has them about 8.3. So let's kind of talk about it. So they open up their first 2 games at home against Vegas and Washington before having to go to Miami, to Chicago. And then they come back for the Jets, have to go to KC, come back home from Green Bay, and then they face KC again right before their bye week. So that is an interesting little start to the year. I think the games against Vegas, Washington, Chicago, and Green Bay, it's 4 wins. The 2 games against KC, the Jets, and Miami, I think those are some tough games. Miami this early in the year, it's probably going to be hot down there. That always helps the Miami players, playing in that hot Miami sun. Not a whole lot of people can keep up with them there. 2 games against KC, I think, isn't there a stat that Patrick Mahomes has yet to lose a game against Denver since he's joined the league? I wouldn't be surprised if Sean Payton finally was able to defeat Patrick Mahomes, but I'm not necessarily betting on that. It's still Patrick Mahomes. It's still the Kansas City Chiefs. And then the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, I think, are a really excellent team. So I think, we're 4-4 heading to the bye. Coming off the bye, you have to go to Buffalo, but then you have Minnesota and Cleveland coming to home. You have to go to Houston, to the Chargers, to Detroit. Then you come back home from New England and the Chargers, and then you end your season with Vegas. And so then coming off the bye, that game against Buffalo in Buffalo is going to be really tough. But this last kind of 7 games they have is a pretty generous stretch. I think obviously that you're glad you get Minnesota, Cleveland, and New England at home. I think that's going to help this team. And then you got Houston sprinkled in there, so that should be another win. I think having to go to the Chargers and to Detroit aren't necessarily easy games. But then, ending your year at Vegas and against the Chargers at home, I mean, this is a team that could win a lot of games. My projection has them at 8.3, but I think, they're going to at least 4 before the bye week. And then, they're at least going to beat Houston. So I think they're at least going to tie the record from last year. But, can they win Minnesota, Cleveland, and New England? I think they can. Can they steal one against the Chargers? Or, maybe KC before the bye? I think they can. And will it beat the Raiders at to end the year? I think they probably will. And so, I have them at 8 wins. I think 8 wins is very likely for this team. Can they get 9 wins? Yeah, I think it's very possible. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. I really don't know. Is this a team I expect that's going to get 10 wins? No. Is this a team that can get 9 wins? Definitely. Is this a team that can get 8 wins? Definitely. Is this a team that gets 7 wins? Probably not. I feel like this team's really going to get 8 or 9. Like 8.5 is a great line. I'm not betting this team. Probably not even going to bet this team till week 6. Like, this is not a team that I want to touch. It's such a weird team. And so who knows? Like, if everything goes well, if Russell Wilson returns to form, Sean Payton proves to be an excellent coach, and the defense stays great, this is a team that can compete to make the playoffs and really compete in a tough AFC. However, if Russell Wilson continues to struggle and Sean Payton has some hiccups in year 1 under his new regime, this is a team that will miss out on the playoffs again. Like, I just don't know what we're going to get from this team. Vegas, has them at plus 500 to win the AFC West. New England was plus 800 to win the AFC East. I'd imagine Denver being closer to plus 800 than, having better odds to win the AFC West. It's a little interesting to me. But I mean, this is a team that definitely is going to be competing for a playoff spot, I think. But do I expect them to make the playoffs? I'm going to say no. If I had to put my life on it, I'm going to say no. But I don't think this is going to be a team that's going to have a top 10 pick again. I think they're going to get better, but 8 or 9 wins, it's probably what they're going to have. I had to put my life on it. I'm putting them at 8 and 9, but I have No clue. So overall, just kind of recapping everything, this is the most unclear, confusing ranking of all time. This could be anywhere from the 28th team to the 10th best team in the NFL. Who knows? A lot of that's because what is Russell Wilson now? Is he still a top 10 quarterback? Is he going to be a top 10 quarterback? Or is he just destined to be a bottom 10 quarterback from now? But I do think these skill positions overrated. It's going to limit this team's offense, but offensive line is going to really help this offense. But I do think the defense is losing great coaching, so I think they're going to struggle. But they have a really good, D-line depth, even if though they don't have, true star players. Defensive line is very injury-proof. But they do have a really beneficial schedule and a much easier schedule than a lot of teams have. So that could really benefit them. So overall, if you're a Broncos fan or a team of any AFC West team, kind of let me know what you think of this breakdown. Where am I right? Where am I wrong? Kind of let me know your thoughts. And we'll be back with the 17th ranked team very, very soon. Thank you for watching.